Okay, next up is Taylor Sturm. He's going to give us a little presentation on an orchid rediscovery. Okay? All right, so it's forward, back, and that's your pointer.
Perfect.
And this will tell you how much time you have.
Does
Okay?
it work?
Once you start it, we'll
Thank you.
go. Okay, thanks.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to follow up the adorable owl videos, but I'll try. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about a very positive conservation update. This is the rediscovery of lesser purple fringed orchid here on Long Island, otherwise known as Cyperaceae. Just so there's no confusion, that is Cyperaceae, and that is me. So I figure before we get into this new population, I should really frame this plant and the history of it here on Long Island. Put a couple of these up here for you. It was never common or abundant as far as we could tell in the botanical record. Certainly we don't know what happened before colonial times and things like that. But there were 7 known locations that we're aware of. By the 1940s, there were only 2 left. There was one that was out on Gardiner's Island, and then there was a really well-known, well-described and documented population in Montauk. Looking back to 1920, that population in Montauk County Park, had about 100 plants. It was a pretty good population. And unfortunately, in the middle half of the 20th century, some gentleman in East Hampton thought, those would look a little better in my yard. And ultimately, a lot of them were dug up, which is obviously very unfortunate. So that population continued up until the latter half of that century. By the 80s and 90s, there were very few plants left, and unfortunately, deer herbivory got the best of them. They were basically eaten out of existence by deer, which is very unfortunate. And so, this Montauk population, I'll just give a quick anecdote. I, many years ago, went out with the now late, great Bob McGrath, so who many people in this room certainly know or knew, and tragically we lost him this past year. But he took me to some of these locations where this plant was known from, and we came up empty as imagined, and so unfortunately it was thought to be extirpated for 31 years, and a little sad face there, but only until 2023. And just some of the source of this history comes from Eric Lamont and his 2025 update on this orchid from just last year. So here's a map of these populations I mentioned. You can imagine why some of the western populations don't exist anymore. We're talking about Brooklyn, and we're talking about Queens, and southwest Suffolk, southern Nassau. These are some of the most developed places in the state. There are those 2 populations I mentioned out in Montauk and also out on Gardiner's Island. Unfortunately, the Gardiner's Island population also winked out of existence when that habitat transitioned to a Phragmites-dominated marsh that was just entirely incapable of supporting that plant. But that triangle right there in the middle, if I don't know how to use this, right there in the middle there, that's the population we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. That is the Cyperaceae population that I very fortunately happened to stumble into. That also comes from Eric Lamont. So, this new population of Cyperaceae, it is within the town of Smithtown. For the good of these plants, I won't be divulging exactly where they are. Not even at happy hour will these lips waver. So don't try to buy me a beer in hopes. No. And there were no populations of this plant known from northern Suffolk County. So this is a new area, this is a new population, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute too. And to save any harassment of these people, I'll withhold any names, but some friends and I went and surveyed this population. We came up with about 186 plants. So this is a pretty good population of this orchid. And about half of those were flowering or attempting to flower, sending up these flower spikes. This population has a lot of good diversity in terms of color, in terms of shape of these flowers, as you might imagine with a plant like this. And there's at least 2 that were white, the albiform, and I'll show you some photos of those in a second. Something about this location, it also harbors a lot of other rare plants. There's at least 3 species of state-listed carex, sedges. There's a lot of other plants that I've only seen in 1 or 2 places. So this clearly is an obscure place that not a lot of people have gone to. And, like I said, in an obscure place. The only reason why I came upon it is because it was April, and I was looking for a plant called Golden Club, Aurantium aquaticum. It's a skunk cabbage relative that I just figured if I thrashed into some relatively strange places I might find it. I did not, but I found this, which is arguably a little bit better maybe. This is what the habitat looks like. You have these cold groundwater seeps that scour some of this muck and leaving this sort of gravelly, sandy bottom. But if you walk off into the muck, you can lose your boots pretty quick. But it's very nice looking. This is what it looked like when I came upon it back in that April. Here you have on the left what the early season leaves of this Platanthera looks like. There might be orchid experts that could see that right away and say, well, that's Platanthera cycodes, obviously. Well, I'm not one of those people, so I had to play the waiting game and go back and go back. So early summer, you start to see them developing their flower heads, and then by July, I start to see these dramatic spikes come up, and sure enough, I look at the lower flower buds, and they're turning purple. And I said, whoa, this is our only purple Platanthera. So I said, goodness, could this be cycodes? A couple days later, I had the oh snap moment. I have no reservations about saying I did not say snap. I'll just show you some photos of these flowers. Here's what the plant looks like in its habitat. It's relatively inconspicuous. Like I said, we found a number of them, but it's remarkable how easily you could walk past them. I'll highlight it there. Very beautiful. Here are some zoomed in photos of the flowers. I think they sort of look like little fairies or little ghosts or something like that. But you can see the diversity in terms of how lacerated the lobes are, the colors. And you have those little pollen structures that look like eyes. Here's the white form that I had mentioned. There's 2 of them that we found, only 2, but it is a rare color morph, but really exciting to see nevertheless. And here's what some of these plants look like as their flowers start to mature. The one on the left there, that's that albiform I was just talking about. You can see there were a lot of flower buds, and that is as far as that flower got before it was nipped by a deer, which was really disappointing. But a lot of them did end up going to seed, which was really encouraging, but I would say a fair amount of them also, unfortunately, were browsed by deer. But beautiful, beautiful plants. Speaking of beautiful plants, I just need to, if I have a minute, I figured I would sneak in some sedge photos. These are some of the state rare sedges that are in this habitat. Carex micheliana, Carex styloflexa. I think I've only seen them in 1 or 2 other places on Long Island, and certainly they're southeastern, so they don't really get upstate at all. And just to go through some thoughts, lessons, and general musings about this population. This is good. Yeah, right? I mean, this is really exciting. The fact that this is something that we thought we lost, and hey, listen, it's still here. And what I kept kind of mentioning is that this is not a historic population that finally came back after some Phragmites was cleared and the seed bank was reactivated. This isn't dedicated efforts that found this population after years and years. This is a new population. And the reason why I really want to hammer that home is because for me, that brings about so much optimism in terms of what else we've lost, what else is dwindling. I mean, this is almost 200 2.5-foot tall purple orchids, and we didn't know they were there. And I mean that in a really good way, because for me, that we can look at other plants that used to be numerous that are gone, and maybe they're not gone. Something to mention is this population does face threats like any relatively well-defined population of rare plants. There are a number of certainly invasive species in this area, none that are dominant, but some that are present. And deer browse is obviously an issue with these types of plants. Would I advocate for any action now? No, I don't think I would, but it's one of those things that we need to make sure that we're able to monitor and look at, because a decade from now, if this population starts to dwindle, we can't let this slide through our fingers again. This is maybe our last chance to have this plant on Long Island. And the reason why I say that, and my last point, is that Long Island ecotypes are important, and preserving Long Island ecotypes are important. And not to get up on my soapbox a little bit, but in a lot of ways, these are our plants. These are a part of our natural history and our natural heritage. And it stands to reason that our plants face different pressures than plants that exist upstate. And so, for example, this plant grows fairly widespread in upstate New York, but it's very rare here. How many of those populations upstate do you think have to deal with saltwater intrusion? How many of those plants do you think have to deal with severe storm surges, bringing storm tides up into these freshwater systems? I would say very few. And so, you think, are these plants that we have more salt adapted? Are they then slightly genetically different from the other populations in New York State? So it makes one wonder, when you're talking about preserving these populations, you're not just preserving a population of plants for the intrinsic value of the plant itself, you're really preserving the genetic diversity that exists among plant species in New York State. And that's why I think it's really important that we have Long Island botanists Long Island naturalists, people like everyone in this room and in the other room, caring about these populations. And that's why it's really important to me that we have agencies and entities like CTUC, like the Long Island Botanical Society, these entities that look at Long Island as a whole entity, and not just 4 counties in New York State. And I think that's really important when you think about preserving plants that may be very abundant elsewhere in the state that are not afforded any state regulation. Oh, there's David S. Pumpkins. So any questions? I'm over by 13 seconds, but I was able to rush through there fast enough, so I think we're good. Thank you, everybody.